Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Uh, this is Arseni, and this is my not quite review, but more like general impressions of Dawn of War 3. What is Dawn of War 3? Well, it is the most recent entry in the excellent Dawn of War real-time strategy games from Relic Entertainment. They are set in a Warhammer 40,000 universe, of which I've been a fan of for a very long time. I've played almost all the video games set in this universe, and when Dawn of War 3 was finally released, I of course couldn't wait to jump into it. Now, these impressions are based on roughly 18 hours of gameplay, which included a single-player campaign, skirmishes against the AI, and multiplayer battles. Now, Dawn of War 3, just to give my quick impression, is a good game that could have been excellent had it had more time in development. And you can clearly see that it was supposed to be a bigger game than it is. In this game, you're taking on the role of orcs, Eldar, or the Space Marines of the Imperium. You can see them all on the screen right now in the excellent opening cinematic. So you have three factions in this game. These three factions are very different from each other. They play very differently, and yet I have to point out that Dawn of War 1 and 2 launched with more factions, and right away this is one of the key reasons why I have my doubts as to whether Dawn of War 3 has enough content at launch to justify the fairly high AAA game price. In fact, all over the game you see holes where you can clearly see where content was meant to go, and yet was cut, likely to release the game in time. That said, as a real-time strategy game, it is an excellent example of its genre. I'm just not sure that there's quite enough content in the game right now to really hold my interest for very long. Of course, there will be faction DLCs, which are going to milk the game and the universe for all they're worth. I'm sure they're going to add Imperial Guard, and Chaos, and Tau, and other races later on. And it saddens me, and yet again, this is an example of a game where you can clearly see the assets are already in the game, but they're not being useful. So, for example, Imperial Guard units and some vehicles are already in this game, but the faction itself is not, and that is a big disappointment. And it's disappointing when companies decide to do that, where you can clearly see that they created the assets, they have them in the game, and yet they will be locked away behind a DLC wall in the future. But enough about that for now. Let's talk a little bit about single-player campaign, which you see on the loading screen in the video right now. The single-player campaign is okay. It's not great. In fact, I wouldn't even call it good. It's okay if you want to learn how to play the different factions. The big problem with campaign, especially narratively speaking, is that rather than giving each faction a campaign, they decided to do one grand campaign, and in different missions of this campaign you assume control of different factions. So, for example, first mission is Space Marine, second mission, which you're seeing now, is Orc mission, third mission is Eldar, and so on and so forth. Now, they did this for story purposes, to tell a story, but what it ends up doing is, just as you're getting the feel for the faction, let's say Space Marines, you're starting to get the feel for them, and suddenly you're playing as orcs. And just as you're starting to get a feel for orcs, you're suddenly starting to play as Eldar in the next mission. It's very jarring, and it doesn't actually suit the purpose of the campaign as a tutorial very well, because every time you go back to the faction, so let's say you played Elder in the 3rd mission, and then you go back to the Elder in the 5th mission, I think, and now you have to like relearn the faction. It's very awkward, it's very jarring, it doesn't quite work as a tutorial. The other thing that doesn't work in a single player campaign is how boring most missions tend to be. Now, not in terms of plot or voice acting or the or the what would I call it, the variety of maps, but in terms of how stale the campaign gameplay feels. Now, StarCraft 2, with its expansions, had really set the bar for amazing single-player real-time strategy campaigns that told a fantastic story, and they did it in an extremely interesting way, where each map felt completely unique. Each map had some certain gimmicks and very interesting objectives, huge variety of objectives, and there were often different ways of completing that mission. But in Dawn of War 3, every campaign mission feels very linear. You go from objective A to objective B to objective C, and the maps expand as you complete objectives. So you never actually get to kind of experience the whole map, which makes the whole process very linear. So that's a bit of a disappointment. That said, however, the voice acting is top-notch. There are some great dialogue snippets, especially the orcs are very funny. The Eldar actually have some pretty cool dialogue and story character developments. But overall, the story is okay. It's nothing special. It just mostly serves to justify why these factions are constantly fighting each other. In terms of, let's talk a little bit about gameplay, which you can kind of see on the screen a little bit. So this Dawn of War game feels very much like a blend of Dawn of War 1 with its big armies and Dawn of War 2, which focused on a few very powerful units. So in this game you have very powerful heroes that you can see me moving around there and wreaking havoc with, as well as a whole bunch of infantry squads and vehicles. Now, the heroes are extremely powerful. They can often take on multiple squads by themselves. They do require quite a bit of micromanagement, but not so much that an older gamer like myself can't handle it. Here, by the way, you see a transition to a skirmish mission. I believe this is a skirmish mission against the AI in this case. You move squads around, and like in the previous Dawn of War games, you don't have resources like minerals or gas or something like that, or food. Instead, you're capturing these these resource points, which then will generate requisition and power for you, as well as elite points. And you use those 3 resources to build more buildings, research upgrades, build units and vehicles, and with elite points, which you slowly generate during the game anyway, whether or not you hold points, but if you hold points you will get, like you can see I'm capturing an elite point right now, you will be able to summon heroes faster. And there's a huge variety of heroes for each faction. I think there's, right now I think there's 9 or 10 for each faction, and each hero feels very different and fulfills a very different role in your army, and actually buffs many heroes will buff your different units in different ways, so that's very, very cool. And they are kind of a big deal in multiplayer. In skirmish, it's unfortunately in skirmish mode right now and multiplayer there's only one game mode, and that game mode is very heavily influenced by MOBAs like League of Legends or Dota, where you have to destroy the enemy's shield generators, which you can see me doing. Then you have to destroy their turrets. Once you destroy the turrets, you have to destroy their power core, or what would be Nexus in League of Legends. So basically, you on every map, it's the exact same game mode, no matter what map you're playing. It's not destroy the enemy or King of the Hill or point control or anything like that. It's just that's what you're doing. You're destroying shield generator, then a turret, then a power core, and that is all you're doing. Which isn't a huge problem on its own, because the game mode is actually fun. The problem is that's the only game mode. That is the problem. And the reason they did it is because they obviously really want to focus on multiplayer in this game, and you can clearly see that they want to appeal to kind of the esports crowd, especially with these powerful heroes that have cooldown abilities. They're all mapped to QWER, just like they would in League of Legends or Dota. So the lack of different game modes is a little bit disappointing, and I'm hoping that the community will step in and tinker around with it. Fortunately, there are already community-created maps, which help the game out a bit. Speaking of multiplayer and skirmishes and 3 factions. Now, I've mentioned that I'm disappointed that there are only 3 factions. That said, however, each faction plays and feels extremely differently, and within each faction there are, I think, 30 or so doctrines, which they borrowed from their Company of Heroes games, also by Relic Entertainment. And those doctrines change the way some of your units, buildings, and faction abilities actually work. So before you go into a match, you get to select your heroes. You get to select, if your heroes are high enough in level, you get to select different hero abilities. And you also get to select 3 doctrines. Now that adds quite a lot of variety and difference between different factions, between how, let's say, two Space Marine players can actually get a pretty different feel to them, and they can play in pretty different ways. So that's cool. What isn't cool, however, is that you have to select your heroes and your doctrines blind. So you don't even know what race you're going to be playing against. You don't know what map you're going to be playing on. You just kind of select your doctrine, select your heroes, and hope for the best. And that is very, very disappointing. They definitely need a better matchmaking system, and they definitely need a better multiplayer lobby, because first couple of times I tried multiplayer with my friend, we had a pretty tough time figuring out the interface and the design decisions. So you can see me here, by the way, destroying the power core. And you can see this giant, Imperial Knight. It's not I don't think it's a full Imperial Titan. I think it's an Imperial Knight. This game is gorgeous. The units have a lot of character. Everything is huge. Everything is kind of larger than life. But again, it feels pretty thin at the moment. For example, in multiplayer, official matchmaking consists of, I believe, 10 or less maps. That is very, very few maps. Like you will see all the skirmish maps very, very quickly. Within each faction, there's quite a lot of potential differences, potential ways to customize that faction. There's a full-on army painter, by the way, which is really cool. I like that feature. You can create your own custom chapters, craft worlds, or orc tribes. But there's very few maps. There's only one game mode in multiplayer skirmish. The single-player campaign is not very long, and it doesn't have a tremendous amount of replay value. In fact, I would say that I'm not planning on playing the single-player campaign ever again once I'm done. There's no replay value like there was in StarCraft 2. There was a lot of replay value in those single-player campaigns. There's no replay value in these campaigns. The other big problem with this game is that it's quite a grind. Your heroes will gain levels that will carry over from game to game, but the level gain is not very fast. And also there's this skull currency that you earn for completing, finishing maps, whether it's a single player campaign or skirmishes against the eye or multiplayer against other people. But the skull gain is also not very high, and you need those skulls to unlock more heroes and unlock more doctrines, and those make a really big difference in multiplayer. So if you are matched against a player who has been playing more, has got more skulls and a lot more stuff, you're gonna have a tough time. So it sounds like I'm pretty negative on the game, and I am, because I can see how good this game, how much better this game could be. Because here's the thing, the gameplay of Dawn of War 3 is amazing. It feels great. It feels so much fun moving these units around, setting them up, flanking the enemy, using powerful hero and unit abilities, just coming up with innovative strategies based on the synergy between different units and heroes. That all feels fantastic. It feels maybe if not fresh, because we've seen this all before in Dawn of War 1 and 2 and Company of Heroes 1 and 2, but it just feels good. It feels like a really, really solid, fun, real-time strategy game when you're playing it. So I just wish there was more of this game. More maps, more gameplay modes, more factions, and I'm sad to see that clearly they're betting on releasing a lot more DLCs or even full-on expansions to add content to this game. So is Dawn of War 3 worth playing? Absolutely. If you're a fan of real-time strategy games or Warhammer 40,000, you're gonna have a good time. Is it worth picking up right now at full price? No. If you can get it on sale for maybe 20% off or more, I would say yes, it's worth it, because then the money you save, you can then spend it on the DLCs that will inevitably come out. Is it worth the full price of admission? No, definitely not. If you are a die-hard fan, like myself, I would say, okay, yes, maybe you're going to get good, solid 12, 15 hours out of the campaign. For everyone else, pick this game up if you can get a discount, or wait until the price has been reduced and there is more content. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next videos.